Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Once again, this is Dr. Shahid Hussain. I've got many requests from my students and friends from across the globe to elaborate the difference between a thesis and a journal article. So today I'm going to discuss the important aspects of a thesis and a journal article to highlight the difference between these two academic writings. If you're almost done with your BS, MS or PhD thesis and want to convert it into a journal article, or you are going to initiate a career in journal writing and intend to use your thesis as a starting point for an article. So whatever your situation is, turning a thesis into a journal article is a logical step and a process that eventually every researcher completes. Journal article and thesis are two important formats of reports in academia, and being a researcher, understanding the difference between these two academic writing is very essential. Let me tell you that they both are having similar internal structure, like both contain an introduction, literature review, research methodology, data analysis, interpretation, findings and conclusions, etc. But at the same time, they differ by purpose, style of writing, and specific components. So let's discuss what are the differences between a thesis and a journal article. The first important difference between a thesis and a journal article is the purpose. So for what purpose both of these academic writings are being written or prepared, that is an important aspect to understand. So when we talk about the purpose of a thesis, the prime purpose of writing a thesis is to obtain a university degree, education, or qualification. Thesis demonstrates how much a scholar knows and how much deep research he or she has done. So a thesis should meet the academic requirements, which may differ from one institution to another. While on the other side, the prime purpose of a journal article is advancement of the knowledge and to establish credibility and contribute in the relevant field. And similarly, an article should meet the journal standards, which may differ from one journal to another. Another important difference between a thesis and a journal article is the potential audience. So both have different audience for which these academic writings are written. As far as the potential audience of a thesis is concerned, the potential audience of a thesis is the educational committees or professors who evaluate whether a scholar is worthy of a degree, while the audience of a journal article is the busy scientists or researchers, individuals looking for practical ideas backed with evidence. Journal article is reviewed by a panel of blind reviewers. A researcher should ensure that the article is within the journal's aim and scope. And this is very important to meet the requirements of the different journals to get your article published in that particular journal. Now, another difference between a thesis and a journal article is the length of both of these academic writings. When we talk about the length of a thesis, let me tell you that the thesis is usually longer. Thesis consists of various chapters. Thesis can run up to around 50 to 200 pages and can contain around 25,000 words or beyond. Then title page, table of content, list of tables, list of figures, acknowledgement, approval sheet, and other initial pages are necessary part of a thesis. Then when we talk about the length of a journal article is shorter in length. An article consists of various sections, and an article can range from 3,000 to 6,000 words depending on the field and the journal. So different journals prescribe different requirements from the author's side to be followed. And the starting pages which I mentioned, which are the mandatory part of a thesis, uh, like acknowledgement, like table of content, a list of figures, etc., which I mentioned earlier, these are not included in a research article. Then another difference is the abstract. Let me tell you that the abstract of a thesis and a research article is also different, especially as regards to the length. The length of the thesis abstract is relatively longer than a journal paper, which usually consists of about 350 words or even beyond the 50 words, while abstract of a research article is relatively shorter in length and is usually consisting of about 150 to 250 words depending on the journal guidelines. While writing a research article for a particular journal, we have to adhere the length of the abstract. This is very important thing. Journals prescribes that what should be the words limit of an abstract, and we have to follow that. Otherwise, journal will tell us to revise the article again and again. So we must be following all the authors guidelines which every journal prescribes for the potential authors of that particular journal. Then another difference between a thesis and a research article is the introduction chapter, introduction portion. When we talk about the introduction in thesis, of course, it is a complete chapter. And when we talk about the journal article, of course, introduction is a section of a research article, very important section, because when we talk about the introduction of a thesis, a detailed introduction is required in a thesis. It should demonstrate familiarity with the existing literature and develop the background more extensively. While a concise introduction is required in the case of a journal article, it should only include information that is absolutely required to understand the gap in research that led to the study. Then another difference between the thesis and a research article is the literature review portion. So when we talk about literature review of a thesis, let me tell you that lengthy review of literature elaborating all the important aspects and variables of the study is required in the case of a thesis, while in the case of a research article, shorter literature review is required, focusing the context of the particular work. Then another important difference between the thesis and a research article to understand is the methodology part. And in this case, the research methodology and approach carried in the thesis should be discussed in detail. Thesis contains detailed operationalization of the variables, and in case of content analysis, the detailed content categorization scheme is the mandatory part of the thesis. However, when we talk about the methodology of a journal article, it is important to note that journal article gives controlled presentation of specific methodology used and experiments conducted. Similarly, the operationalization of the variables and content categorization scheme are usually not presented in the journal articles. Then another important aspect to understand the difference between the thesis and a journal article is the discussion. Let me tell you that the detailed interpretation of results is mandatory requirement of the thesis. A thesis demonstrates complete understanding of the obtained data and indicates interest in future directions for research. All findings should be presented in the thesis in detail. As far as a research article or a journal article is concerned, an article requires concise discussion about the results. So only the findings related to the research objectives, research questions, and research hypotheses need to be presented in an article. So unnecessary information is usually avoided in the case of a research article, while detailed presentation, everything in detail is required in the case of a thesis. Similarly, references is another important aspect to understand the difference between a thesis and a research article, because in the case of a thesis, exhaustive list of references is added in the thesis. Some include a bibliography and some might even include a definition section as well. However, when we talk about the references in a research article, the important thing to note is that selective list of references that have been cited within the article is added in the journal article, and unnecessary references are avoided to be included in the list of the bibliography or the references in the case of a journal article. Now, the last difference between a thesis and a journal article which I'm going to share with you is the appendices portion. When you talk about the appendices in thesis, let me tell you that inclusion of appendices is mandatory in thesis due to the need for complete documentation. In the case of a thesis, we have to add our questionnaire, coding sheet, or any other data collection tool which we have used in the thesis, in the research in the research work, we have to add that in the appendices portion of a thesis, and any other important information which is important to understand the different aspects of a thesis, that should be added in the appendices portion of a thesis. However, when we talk about the appendices of a research article or a journal article, it is important to note that inclusion is optional, as space and content requirements may limit the use of these in the journal article. So these were some of the important aspects of a thesis and a journal article to understand the difference between these two academic writings. I hope you have understood it. If you want to get the notification of my upcoming video lectures, do subscribe the channel and also press the bell icon. Inshallah, we shall meet again soon with another video lecture. Till that time, take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz.